So welcome to ActiveRain University, everybody. Today we're gonna do a crowdsourcing webinar, and this one's going to be on how to host a better open house. And the idea with these crowdsourcing webinars, and this is maybe the third or fourth one that we've done now, is we ask you guys, the members of ActiveRain, to share some ideas with us based on a certain topic. Then me, I'm your host, Bob Stewart. I get to go in and kind of weed through, and this time we had about 110 posts that were written about open houses, and I kind of weed through and pull out some of the good ideas that you guys share with us. This one was I don't want to say it was challenging. There was a lot of great ideas in here. And when we kind of designed this, the premise was we asked you guys to share with us a tactic or a couple of tactics that you like to use as it relates to some component of your open house. And so you're going to get some stuff that's kind of on the front end, right? What are the things that we need to think about or do before the open house ever gets started? We've got some stuff that's, while we're actually at the open house. I've got a couple of things for after. It was very interesting to read some of these posts because a lot of you guys that did respond, or not a lot, but there was a fair number of people that went in and literally gave us the entire blueprint for everything they do at their open house. And so as I go through and share some of the ideas on the call today, I'm going to give you guys the links to the blog post that I'm referencing as I share each idea. Gosh, inside of some of these blog posts, there is many, many more ideas than the one that I choose to share from that particular post. So we'll share with you guys some of the ideas. We'll also then share with you guys the blog post from which these ideas came and allow you, man, if you got an open house coming up this weekend or you're preparing for one in the future and you'd like to get maybe some more ideas even than what we share today, you can dive into those individual blog posts as well. So again, I'll be your presenter today. You guys are the ones bringing us all these great ideas, and I'll try to give everybody their kind of just due who shared some of these ideas with us. So before we decide to do the open house, there's a couple of things that were kind of prevalent throughout a lot of these blog posts that I think it's important that we just kind of bring up. And so the first one, and this is something that Laura Allen brought up in her post, and again, you can see the links for the post there. Carrie will be sharing the links with you as we go through. You'll also be able to get your hands on the entire slide deck at the end, which will include the links that you see on here. The first thing we have to consider is, do you really want to do it? Right? Do you really want to host the open house? And if you're one of these people, and there was a bunch of people like this in the blog posts that were presented, they don't like open houses. And so one of the things that Laura talks about in her blog post is your attitude about the open house is very much going to be a direct reflection on whether or not you have success with the open house. And so the first thing that you need to decide is, do I really want to be doing open houses? And there were some folks that swear by these. There was one guy that wrote that 50% of his business has literally come from open houses over the course of a 15-year career. So this stuff can work, and it's funny because even the people that said, I don't like these open houses, I don't like doing them, a lot of those people would even admit they work, right? They get me in front of people in the community, they get my name and my face out there, but they just don't like doing them. And so I think the first thing you need to consider is, hey, do I really want to be doing these? Do I like doing them? Because it's going to come through in everything that you do, from the preparation and the setup to the actual, the open house itself. Your attitude is going to have a reflection on that. And Laura does a nice job, and we'll see Laura's name through here a few other times, I believe, as well. But she does a nice job of really talking about, look, from the outset, like, is this something you want to be doing? One of the things that Tammy talks about in her blog post is targeting an area that you want to do open houses in. And Tammy said, especially when she was a little bit earlier in her career and maybe she didn't have as many listings as she wanted to be out there doing open houses, what she would do is she would actually go through the MLS and look at houses that kind of fit her target. So maybe it was a certain price range or a certain area of town, and she would actually go through and do CMAs on the houses that were out there in some of the areas that she knew she might like that weren't her listings, and if it fit her criteria, she would offer to hold the house open for the listing agent. And this is something you guys could absolutely be doing in your market, but she was very precise about finding certain set of houses, and she would mention in her blog post, that there wasn't very many more than 4 or 5 houses on the market at any one given time that she would be interested in doing. And she would approach the agent, she would ask them, and sometimes they would even say, well, no, I'm not interested in having that one open, but I'm interested in, you could do this other one, and that wasn't one that met her criteria. So she said, she would say, hey, thanks, but no thanks. I have a very certain set of criteria that I'm looking at, and that allowed her to really be an expert in the houses that she was holding open. So targeting area, and now sometimes this might have to do with, if you have multiple listings, there may be houses that you're not necessarily interested in doing opens on, and sometimes you kind of have to do them anyway because your client's really adamant about having an open house. But Laura mentions in her, Are You Addicted to Open Houses post that she's only doing open houses on houses that warrant being held open. And a little bit later, we've got a slide that talks about, are the owners on board? Are they game to do the things that need to be done in order to have a successful open house? And so sometimes, the house won't warrant being held open if the owners aren't, fully engaged in that process. So if they're not interested in making the little fixes around the house that are going to make the house really show-worthy and pop, or if they're not interested in cleaning up, or some of the basic things that we need to have in place to have a successful open house, maybe that house doesn't warrant being held open. And so part of your business is just to determine, when do I pick and choose a house that I think is going to get a good response, that's in a great trafficked area, right? You may choose not to hold an open house on a house that's way out in the sticks because it just doesn't make sense that people are going to show up there. And Laura does a good job at kind of looking at and evaluating, or kind of taking us through her methodology and evaluating like what warrants actually holding the house open. Another thing to consider kind of before we even get started and start to plan our open house is, when do we want to hold this thing? And there was a really good, now I apologize because I might mispronounce her name. I believe it's Bandela, or Bandel. She had written a post about one of the things she does with her open house is she wants to make sure the open house is the first time that anyone's able to set foot in the open house. So she may have the listing out there for a couple of days or a week before the open house is ready to go, but she's not going to have showings at that house until that first day of that open house, and that will become the first day of showings for her. So you got to consider, like, when do you want to hold this thing open? Do you want to make it kind of the culmination of the house coming on the market and making it the first time that people get a chance to get in there and see? And she mentions in her post that it really helps to kind of build excitement, and you get that kind of first day, and especially in a really, in a tight market where a lot of our markets are tight, you're going to get a lot of good traffic because people are just waiting for these houses to hit the market. Another thing that was kind of a prevalent theme throughout these, and I don't know that it necessarily ties into, when is the, well, I guess it does tie into when is the best time, is you have to consider what else is kind of going on in your market on any given day. And a lot of us are doing open houses on the weekends. Okay, there was a couple of folks that talked about broker opens and how they might do those broker opens like on a Thursday evening or something like that. Most of us are doing our public open houses on the weekends, and so there's a lot of other stuff that could be going on around town on the weekends. And for me, it was nice to see a couple of people kind of acknowledge that. Like, one lady was in Charlotte, and she said, look, it's probably not the best time on like a Sunday afternoon when the Panthers are playing, right? People are, during football season, people are in watching the football games. And another person had mentioned that, I think, out of Dallas. Like, people just don't come out as much when the Cowboys are playing, right? A lot of people talked about having a time that kind of coincided with what folks might be doing during the day. And so one lady from down in the South had mentioned how, a lot of people they have church on Sunday mornings, and then after church in their area, a lot of folks will go to brunch, and so she'll try to make her open houses kind of fit around people's brunch schedule. So it'll be like a 1:30 to 3:30 thing, where as they're getting, exiting brunch. But these are things we have to consider, right? If there's, some kind of a festival going on in town, maybe it makes sense to make your open house kind of line up with the end of the festival, not necessarily right in the heat of the festival. So again, you're going to want to consider this stuff. You're going to want to make sure that you're not, again, I would never go to an open house while the Seahawks are playing on Sunday. So, and there's a lot of folks out there like that, right? It might not be the best time to have your open house while everybody's at church. Those are the things that you need to consider in terms of when do you want to hold this thing open. And we talked about this a little bit already, but you really have to make sure that your sellers are on board with this. It's going to be, in a lot of ways, their work that goes into making the house show ready and making it so that people that are showing up feel, invited and warm and welcome at this house, that really the sellers are responsible for getting in tip-top shape. It's interesting, though, and there was a lot of posts, and I think I'm going to touch on this a little bit later. There was a number of posts where people talked about the effort that they put in to bringing these open houses together, and I was actually a little bit surprised. Let me just have you guys check in real quick in the questions area. How many of you guys are willing, when you go into an open house, or maybe you even go there the day before to kind of check things out, how many of you guys are willing to clean, like to literally roll up your sleeves and get in there and help the homeowner make sure that house is a good representation of you as an agent? Because what ends up happening is, anything the homeowner doesn't do, or they short on, or they told you they were going to vacuum with some nice smelling perfumes or something in the vacuum bag, and it just didn't happen, and now the house kind of has a funny smell to it when you get there. All right, interesting. So a lot of you guys are willing to get in there, and that's good. I mean, it's a indication of, and there's one guy who's like, nope, cleaning is a requirement, and so Bob's going to make sure that the homeowners get on board with this. But this is something that I saw through a lot of the blog posts where people talked about, you have to make sure that your sellers become a part of this process, and it's almost integral to the success of the open house that sellers understand, look, for a lot of people, it's going to be their first time seeing your house. We just got to make sure they're on board for that experience. This last one, find someone to help you. A lot of folks that wrote about this, and I use George Post as an example because George is a loan officer, and so he wrote about open houses from the perspective of a loan officer or somebody who's been there to assist agents who do open house. And George says about once a month he'll get out with an agent and co-host an open house with them. But having someone there to help you for a lot of people was just as much about safety, right? You guys are out there in these open houses. It makes sense to have someone there to help you. Why? Because you get multiple people coming through at the same time. There's the sellers kind of entrust you with making sure that nobody walks off with any small valuables or things like that. Right? We're going to hope most of that stuff gets put away, but it's still nice to have somebody there to help you, if not just for your own safety and protection, to be able to touch everybody that comes in. And then if you're able to do it with somebody like George, right, a loan officer, somebody that brings some additional value to the table, you've now got kind of another reason for people to show up to your open house, right? It wouldn't be crazy if you had your loan officer there with you to have some of the marketing say, get pre-qualified at today's open house for free or something like that, that helps maybe drive some more traffic to the open house as well. It also helps to have somebody else just out there marketing that thing or wanting people to show up. So prior to the open house, right, there's some things that we need to think about or consider, and a lot of the things we're going to do prior to the open house. So we've said to ourselves, okay, it's open house time. We've got our date picked out. It's not going to overlap the Seahawks game, right? Our sellers are on board. We want to do this. We're excited about it, right? That's going to come through in our open house. So what are the things that we kind of want to think about in terms of maybe marketing or getting this thing set up? One idea that kind of came out of this, and I don't know if you guys have tried this before, but the folks that mentioned it liked the idea because it was kind of this joint effort and it got more folks into the neighborhood, is this idea of an open house or a neighborhood open house, right, where you're not the only person in the, let's say, subdivision who's hosting an open house that day. You might have, there's 3 or 4 listings in there. You get together with the other listing agents and you guys kind of co-sponsor an open house, right, where each of your marketing kind of amplifies the marketing of the other folks. And it's Nina, I think. Nina, in her post, talks about this idea of going out working with other agents, and she even talks in her post about how then at her, at her open house, she's got a little map that's got, the locations of each of the other open houses in the neighborhood. She maybe even has a couple flyers for some of those other open houses. But it's just an idea of that collaborative effort where all of your marketing, right, is going to help kind of pay off and send people to each other's open houses. Now, this only works. Well, I guess this would work for you if you were kind of the lazy agent who didn't really want to do a bunch of marketing and you kind of piggyback on other people's. But obviously, this is going to work the best when everybody involved, right, all 3 or 4 different agents that have houses open are all going out and marketing these things so that everybody's effort is kind of leading to a better collective effort. Now, Nina, again, talks about this in her blog post, and you see a bunch of these same names because some of the people that wrote these posts, just the posts themselves, you guys, are almost like roadmaps for wanting to do a successful open house. So in Nina's post, she talks about, look, before I go into my open house, I'm going to know the area. I'm going to know it inside and out. And so if she's doing a neighborhood open house, she absolutely knows those other open houses that are going on in her area. But if it's just her house being held open, she's going to know, she's going to definitely have previewed the other listings in the area, right? So if somebody comes into the house and is saying to her, hey, have you seen that, the other place down the street that's, on the market for $20,000 less than this place? Like, what's the difference? Why the difference in price? She's previewed that other listing. She knows the comps. She knows what else has been sold recently in the market. I mean, she is never walking into one of her open houses cold, right? She always kind of knows what's going on. And I mean, this helps in the conversations that she's able to have with the people that come through the open house. I don't know that we needed to share this with you guys, right? If you're not doing this already, but it was enough people mentioned this that it seemed appropriate. And I'll tell you, I'm kind of an open house junkie. Like, I like to just go to open houses. And over the years, I mean, even when I'm not in the market, I will go to open houses. I like houses. I'm shocked at the number of open houses that I've been to where I've asked somebody about the house down the street that's for sale, or because I'm mainly going in the neighborhoods I've lived in, so I kind of know what's going on around. I'm shocked at how often the person hosting the open house hasn't known as much as I thought that they would. So know the area. Okay, so it's prior to the open house. We'll talk about some ways to kind of get people involved. And so there's a lot of folks, and it seemed that in some of the most successful, or it seemed like the people that were writing about open houses from the perspective of, I do these things in my business and I have a lot of success with them, almost to a person, when somebody laid out kind of, here's my plan, almost to a person, each of the people that seemed to have success did something along these lines in terms of inviting the neighbors. And Praffel in his post talked about the reason he does this is because many years ago he went to a seminar and they talked about how to have a successful open house. And he said he was willing to admit, look, the seminar was very in-depth and they do a lot of things that I don't do. But one of the things that he's very religious about is this concept of inviting the neighbors. And one of the reasons why he does this is because out of that conference came this idea that about 3 to 7 homes are listed within 90 days from any 250 homes in a certain area. So anytime you have a listing in an area, there's a decent chance that in the next 90 days from the surrounding 250 homes, there's going to be some additional listings coming on the market. And that open house for Praffel is as much of an invitation to those people that are thinking about listing in the near future as it is to anybody who might be thinking about buying this particular home. Right? So Praffel is always interested in making sure that the people around his listing are aware of him as the listing agent for the potential that they may be listing at some point soon in the future, and inviting them to the open house gives him a chance to interact with them, gives him a chance to get questions from them about what he might do for their listing, right? I mean, this is not something brand new. And the thing about open houses is, look, you guys have been doing these long before a lot of the other kind of techniques in our business have evolved, right? Long before there were internet leads in real estate, you guys were doing open houses. So these strategies aren't necessarily brand new and evolving, but I think, the culmination of all of these strategies can make for a really successful open house. And the reason, again, I'm giving you some of these links back, because Praful's not just talking about inviting the neighbors. He's going in and kind of explaining the why behind it and what kinds of conversations he's having with these neighbors if they do show up. So how are we going to invite the neighbors, right? We're going to walk the neighborhood, right? We might call into the neighbors, right? We might get our title company to do some postcards up for us and send postcards into the neighbors. One of the ideas that I kind of liked and I thought was cool, and a lot of people that mentioned it said it works really well, and it works for a couple of reasons, but it's this special viewing time for neighbors, right? It makes them kind of feel like, hey, you guys get a chance to see this house before anybody else, right? If you've got somebody you know that's interested in moving in the neighborhood, here's a chance to kind of get that sneak peek, right? And this might, for most people that mention this was something they're doing, a half hour or an hour before, the public open house. A lot of people said that, or not a lot, there was a few people that said they'll do something where they do like a special invite. In order to get into the open house early, the neighbor has to bring the postcard or the invitation or something like that. One of the things that somebody mentioned that I like for the special viewing time is he said, look, it gives me a chance to kind of separate, right, the people that are maybe just the looky-loos and the neighbors that like to pop in and kind of check out the neighbors from the people that are maybe more serious buyers. Again, you may not act like that during the open house, right? You're going to be receptive to everybody. One of the kind of the small suggestions, and one of the things about a crowdsourced webinar like this, you get a bunch of these kind of cool small suggestions. Like one of the ones I don't have on a slide here that I thought was just maybe diabolical is the word that she was talking about. When you're making the place look good and smell nice, and she said instead of baking cookies, like there was so many people that say, I want to have this fresh, clean smell in the house. She said instead of baking cookies, she will literally just put like a little piece of foil with some vanilla on the foil, right? She'd make a little boat with the foil, put some vanilla in there, and then put it in the oven on low, right? And it makes the house smell like you're cooking cookies, you're baking cookies, right? There's all these cool little ideas. This one was, consider making the invitation to the neighbors from their neighbor, right? From the homeowner, instead of from you as the agent. So instead of, hey, I'm Johnny the agent, Bob the agent, hosting an open house this weekend in your neighborhood, consider making, especially like a postcard invitation from the neighbors. Hey neighbor, it's been great living next to you guys for the last 12 years, and we'd like to find you a really great neighbor to replace me, right? Consider making that invitation something coming from the homeowner. And then when you're thinking about inviting the neighbors, most of us geographically are going to go like maybe, if we were thinking about door knocking, maybe we're going to do every house in the subdivision. Or if we were thinking about sending postcards, maybe we're going to send postcards to everybody in a half-mile radius or something like that. Now Ritu and then Barbara Tadero, and Barbara's kind of a master of postcard marketing, but one of the things that both of them talk about in their blog posts is not only do they invite the neighbors, but based on the home that they're selling, they're going to go out and try to find other targeted people that they think might be worth inviting to their open house. And so Barbara she does a lot of stuff with 55 and older communities. And so when she does that, right, she's got some lists that she's bought in her market that's got people over the age of 55 on this mailing list, right? Those are going to be people that she targets for an open house that's in a 55 and over community. Ritu talked in her post about a lot of the homes that she'll end up holding open are in that first-time home buyers range. And so what she'll do is she'll go out and target renters around her area. Right, so she'll go, a mile or 2 miles around the property and look at apartment complexes or people that are renting, and those will be people that get an invitation. Right, so this concept of inviting the neighbors is all about just kind of drumming up the people around that might be interested in the house, that might be interested in you as the listing agent, that might have a friend or family. Right? You guys know these things, but do you actually do them? So let me ask you guys, how many of you guys for your last open house, so all of you guys kind of checked in and said, my last open house was Sunday or it was how many of you guys like proactively went out and invited the neighbors? check in for me. Is there anybody here who's willing to say, no, I did not invite the neighbors? Never. No. A couple of yeses. Just sent postcards. I did not. No. So, you know, it's not a bad idea to think about getting some of those neighbors out there. And it looks like a lot of you guys are not doing it. What does Jeff says here? He says, yeah, Jeff says, I do it every time. I find a category of inventory below what I am listing and market to them. So, yeah, I mean, the neighbors are an important part of a successful open house. So if you guys are using any kind of like a CRM or a lead management system, especially for internet leads, there's a pretty good chance, especially on one of the better CRMs, that you have the ability to kind of look at the prospects that have been generated and break them down based on the price range of the homes that they're looking at. So Anita talks in her blog post about, you know, not only does she invite the neighbors, but she's going to go out and kind of make a special, you know, invitation to people or prospects that she has in her database that were interested in a property like the one that she's holding open. Right? So if I'm in Seattle and it's the Wallingford area, and in Wallingford I'm hosting an open house, I'm going to go back through my CRM and I'm going to let all the folks in there that have been on my website, that have been looking at homes in Wallingford, I'm going to let them know they're going to get something special for me, that this open house is coming up. One of the maybe the best ideas in here, and I'm not familiar enough with the ins and outs of each one of your MLSs, but we had this on the Northwest Multiple MLS when I was involved in the selling of real estate back in the mid-2000s. And it was this reverse prospecting. So again, I don't know how many of you guys have reverse prospecting on your MLS, but you should really check out and see if you do, because it can help you in many more ways than how Paula talks about what they do with reverse prospecting in the MLS. But the idea with reverse prospecting is this. Me as an agent, I go in and I set my clients up on a certain home search in the MLS. So anytime something new comes up on the MLS for them, they're going to be notified of it, or me as the agent will be notified, and I have to then forward it on to the client. It's kind of depending on how your MLS works. The idea with reverse prospecting then is any other agent in my MLS can go in and look up the searches that other agents have set up. And so let's say Michelle, right, she's got an open house coming up this weekend. She goes into the MLS and she does a search, a reverse prospecting search, right, similar to her home, which is going to show her that me, Bob, has a client with an automated home search set up that matches this house. So what Paula and her team do is they go out there and they contact the agents. Now, I don't have in here the idea of contacting the agents, right? And I know a lot of you guys do this. You send like a blast out to your office, or you send a blast out to your local MLS or something like that, or the agents in your area, and you let them know you have an open house coming up. But what Paula does, because you can't call every agent, but what they will do is they will use the reverse prospecting tool on the MLS, and then they will go in and directly contact agents that have set a client up in the system that's looking at a home similar to the home that they will be holding open. I think that's a great idea, right? To make a personal invitation to an agent, hey, Jeff, we've got an open house coming up this weekend, and I see that you have a client in the MLS set up with criteria matching the home that we're going to be holding open. Well, gosh, we know inventory's low, and looks like you've had this client set up for a while, and if they're a serious client, you want to make sure they're there on the first day that we have this open house on Sunday, right? It's going to be the first time anybody's getting into this house. It's priced right. Things are moving quick. We expect a bunch of offers this first day. That's a great way to go out and find agents in your MLS who have clients that match up with your open house, and really be able to find some people that would be potentially motivated to make an offer, right, from the open house. And a lot of the folks that wrote these posts said things like, the goal is never to sell the open house, right? Very rarely do I sell the house because of somebody that walked in. That doesn't mean that shouldn't, right? Just because it doesn't happen doesn't mean it shouldn't be the goal. And this is a great way to really target folks that that are interested in your house. blast the internet, right? And so almost every single person that wrote, some kind of a more extensive piece on what they do for their open houses talked about some component of the internet. And there's to me, these ones are the obvious ones. But look, if you guys are not using Zillow, Trulia, and Realtor.com to showcase your open houses, you absolutely need to be doing that. I believe on Zillow and Trulia there's kind of a free option. I think Realtor.com, you have to have the showcase subscription or whatever in order to get your stuff kind of into their more prominent positions in terms of an open house. But here's what I would encourage each of you guys to do. And when you're thinking in terms of blasting the internet, you want to be in the places where when somebody in your market is looking for open houses this weekend, that they're going to find you. And so, and I did this, when I was setting this class up, I want to know, like, what are the sites out there that show up when you're looking for an open house? And so I probably did, open house this weekend in Seattle for about 12 different cities. And no matter which city I did, those three at the top there came up 1, 2, or 3 in some order. Okay, so no matter what your feelings are about these guys, if when the people that are thinking about looking at open houses this weekend in your market are going online, if these are the companies and the websites that they're seeing at the top, it makes absolute sense for you to be there. Okay? The second part to that then would be, because in some of your different markets, you are going to see different people. Now, you're always going to see those guys, right? But you're going to see some different sites in there as well. And those are sites that you absolutely need to get your open house marketed on as well. So the MLS, right, that's what's going to happen there. We're going to put it in the MLS. There was one lady that talked about, like, their MLS has, like, an open house field. Awesome. If your MLS has an open house field, you absolutely want to use that, right? But she said that also she'll do it in the agent remarks. She'll put in when the open house is going to be. But the MLS is going to be the kind of the primary focus for getting that thing distributed out to a lot of these places. And for many of you guys, like, it's going to end up on Zillow or Trulia via that MLS feed. But you always want to kind of go in there and make sure, right? Like on Trulia, I know you can claim your listing. I think the same thing on Zillow, right? You want to get that thing claimed and make sure that the information from your MLS passed through to those sites that end up showing up, again, when somebody does a search like, open houses this weekend in Seattle, or just open houses Seattle, Washington, right? Now, you're going to want to blog about this thing. And one of the things about the blog and the idea of having a blog that's about the open house itself, right? Because when you put it in the MLS, that's just kind of the listing. It doesn't talk about the open house. It doesn't necessarily talk about, your lender being at the open house or getting a free pre-qual, or maybe you having a contest or a drawing for the blog. You can really paint a picture of what the open house is going to be, and then that could potentially become kind of a landing page for maybe any other internet marketing that you were going to do. So like if you were going to do some Facebook marketing, you're going to run some real targeted geographic Facebook ads, right, around, a half a mile from the address of your house, and just get your Facebook ad in front of people that are right around that area. It might be a good idea to have that Facebook ad point back to the blog post that you've written about the open house. Right? Definitely be using like Craigslist or Backpage. These are kind of the what do they call these? The classifieds. Right? Craigslist is one. Even if Craigslist doesn't show up when somebody does a search, people use Craigslist. Okay, it's like the 4th most used website in the world. Right? You've got this huge community of folks that are using it. Like, it makes sense to just have your ad there. One of the kind of good suggestions, right? So like people talked about putting it on their Facebook business page, or making sure that they'll even put it on their personal page and say something like, looking for me this Sunday, I'm going to be hosting an open house. Come over for cookies or whatever, right? They kind of do it in a more personal manner when it's on their personal page. I believe it was Chris Ann who talked about she's involved in some Facebook neighborhood groups. And if you guys haven't found any neighborhood groups in Facebook yet, I would strongly encourage you to get in there and look for groups based on neighborhoods. Now, some of them are like closed groups, and Chris Ann talks about scenarios where there's closed Facebook groups, and you actually have to be somebody that lives in the neighborhood in order to get accepted into those Facebook groups. If that's the case, then she talks about, she makes sure that her sellers, right, who are on board, so that was one of the first things that Chris Ann checked in on. Her sellers who are on board, she gets them to post the notice of her open house into these Facebook neighborhood groups. Read Chris Ann's post about Facebook neighborhood groups. I think she does a good job of talking about the balance between being in there and kind of only promoting versus also engaging. So she's not in there just posting her blog post about her open house this weekend. Like, that's not all she ever does in there, right? She gets in the neighborhood group and she engages people, and she takes place in the other discussions that are going on in there, and she tries to be a valuable resource so that when she does decide to kind of pop her open house ad, and that's really what it is, right? But when she decides to pop her open house ad in there, it's more well accepted because she's just not somebody driving by, dropping an ad, and running off, right? She's somebody that's engaged in that group prior to ever having thought about placing that ad in there. Okay, so we all have a sign, right? We all have a listing sign. But one of the things that, gosh, I don't have the person's name on here, so I can't, my apologies to whoever brought this suggestion to the table, but is many days in advance of actually having the house open, it's probably a good idea to have a sign right that says something like open house Sunday 1 to 4. Right? In advance. The people driving around, the neighbors that, like, half of you guys, or maybe more than half of you, never went out and told the neighbors there's an open house. So I guess this would be kind of your fallback, right? Hope that they drive by the house, see the open house sign, and make a mental note to come back. Right? This is not a bad idea, right? You want to make sure, and these are all, right? No one of these ideas is going to, make 50 people show up at your open house next weekend. It's the cumulative of all of these ideas and kind of a plan to attacking this open house that makes these things successful. Other signs around the neighborhood prior to the day of the open house. And so obviously on the day of the open house, and I would imagine almost every one of you on here, the day of your open house, assuming that, all the covenants of the homeowners association and the laws of your local jurisdictions are met, right? You're going to place signs out on the day of. But how many of you guys go out and do a little bit of legwork and prior to the days of, so 3 days prior, place signs around the neighborhood that kind of get that traffic thinking about this open house without actually having to drive by the house? So Debbie's post right here, this one, if there's only one post in here that you get a chance to read, well, Nina has one and Debbie has. Both of their posts are very well constructed kind of timelines of the things you want to consider, throughout, leading up to the open house, during the open house, even after the open house. But in this particular portion, she talks about just having, good coverage completely around the neighborhood many days prior to the open house actually taking place. And then get the sellers to help. Okay, so we talked about them being on board, and I think we talked about that earlier in terms of just them cleaning up the house, making it show ready, doing all the kind of minor adjustments that need to be made, there may be some minimal painting, right? Just the things that need to be done to get the house ready to sell regardless of the open house. Now, getting the sellers to help as it directly relates to the open house, right? We want to make sure that, they're willing to share this thing on their Facebook or maybe jump into a Facebook group, or, right, we want to give them flyers so that they can pass them out at work, or that they're sharing this stuff with their family and friends. Right? We want to make sure that they're on board with helping us market this thing just as much as they're on board with helping us make sure the house is ready to go. All right, so during the open house, right, the magic. But it doesn't matter what happens at this point if we didn't do all that other stuff to kind of make sure that we got some good traffic coming through the house. Okay, make sure all the clutter is removed and the house is in top shape for showing. So this, I asked the question earlier, how many of you guys, like the day of or the day before, will get there and go, oh my goodness, like, we need to do some work here and really dive in? This is stuff that, assuming that you did kind of the right consultation at the listing appointment, right, this is hopefully stuff that's kind of come together for you as the open house gets ready. One of the reasons why the lady earlier talked about how she really kind of focused everything around that open house in terms of that was the first time anybody got in there to see it and show it. right? You know, on top of this kind of suspense being built for it, and on top of having a day where, man, those people that are really hungry to get that house because it's this last one on the market in this tight inventory market are coming in to see this thing, is she knows she's got a date where those sellers have to have everything in tip-top shape for showing, right? This should be kind of the penultimate day for this. Signs everywhere, right? So on the day of the open house, right, if you're not somebody like Debbie who's gone out a couple of days prior, on the day of the open house you want to have signs. And look, I saw people in there who said, you know, I got 6 signs, and I always use them. I see people that said, I have 15 open house signs, and I'll use them all. It seems to be that the more the better, right? Obviously, the more kind of things you can get out on the street, the kind of more chances you can have to get somebody interested, right? The better off you're going to be. And you can make them stand out, and we have people who talked about doing things, like one guy always does a barbecue, right? And he just does hot dogs and hamburgers, but on his sign it says, you know, open house, free barbecue, hot dogs and hamburgers, right? And that kind of makes it stand out a little bit. People talked about using balloons. Like, I don't know, like I said, I've gone to a lot of open houses in my day. I don't know necessarily that I've ever not been thinking about going to an open house, seen balloons, and thought, ooh, party, I'm going. But I've also never seen balloons and thought, I was going to that open house, now the balloons, I'm not, right? I don't know, balloons are a fun little thing, right? If you're one of those people that just, you need to have that feel of a party, maybe balloons will help make things stand out a little bit. Okay, so there was a lot of talk inside of these posts about the idea of like what you actually do when you're at the open house. So when somebody comes into the open house, are you that type that, you know, wants to escort them through the house and show them certain features? And we had some people, and there's a whole gamut on this, right? So I'm not necessarily going to suggest to you there's a best way to do this. One guy talked about how his open houses are very professional. He wants them to be presented professionally. He wants the people that enter the house to know that this is a professional deal going on here. And so he takes every person who comes to his open house, gets a guided tour. That may not be for you, right? Because on the flip side of that, you had a lot of people that were saying things like, look, I don't like to be that guy who's trying to show them, here's the kitchen, right? Obviously, they know it's the kitchen. I'm just going to kind of give them a brief introduction when they walk in, maybe, you know, tell them a few things to look through as they're walking through the house. And I'm going to sit back, and I'm going to be there at the end to follow up with them and ask them if they have any specific questions. But I don't want to be that person that's kind of stalking them along the way. At some point, you need to engage the visitors, right? So whether you're that guy who takes them through the house and wants to have a friendly conversation with them and get to know them and feel like that will do a better job of helping convince them that you might be the agent for them if they don't already have an agent, or whether you're that person that decides, you know, hey, I'm just going to meet them when they come in the door. You need to engage them at some point. Okay, but don't be a stalker, right? I don't know that anybody likes that guy that just walks along and says, oh, did you see the chandelier? Did you notice this is a bathroom? Like, well, they get it. So what should you have to give them, right? What kinds of things at the open house should you have so that somebody that comes in can walk away with something? Gold bars. That was the best piece of advice that I saw, was gold bars. So make sure your lender brings the gold bars. Obviously, we can't give away gold bars, right? Nancy talked in her blog post about a couple of different types of flyers that she always likes to have. So she's got an About This Home flyer. And she talked in there about how she'll go to a lot of open houses where the agent will just have a print off from the MLS. And she said, God, I always felt like that was kind of lazy. So if you do that, like, I'm not necessarily saying you're lazy, but Nancy likes to put together a flyer for the house, right? Something that's a little bit better than just that MLS print off, and maybe highlights some of the things that are great about the house, right? She also likes to bring her neighborhood flyer, right? Because somebody that's looking in a house, they might be looking in that house because they like the neighborhood, right? So she doesn't want to miss them, right? She doesn't want to miss an opportunity to get her name, contact information in front of them if they were just interested in the house. So she always brings an About the Neighborhood flyer. And then she'll also have something, and this might not have been from Nancy's post, this might have been somebody else's suggestion. They always bring something with nearby listings, because what ends up happening is you get that person that walks through the open house, and as they're leaving, you can tell they didn't really like it or they weren't really a fan, and you want to have something to hand them or to give them that lets them know, hey, you're here for more than just this house, right? You can help them with any of these nearby listings here as well. Now, that might be something you want to check with your sellers. Let them know, hey, you know, I'm not just doing this. I'm not just promoting other listings at your open house like when I'm at the open house down the road next weekend, I'm going to be giving flyers out that have your listing on it. Comps, comparables, right? And this goes back to before when we were talking about being prepared, right? Knowing the neighborhood, knowing what's going on there. But, you know, especially if you have a house that's well priced, right? You know it's well priced. You price it. You know what the comps are, right? It's not a bad idea to have those comps on hand to be able to show somebody, because if somebody walks in and they're wondering, well, why? Gosh, this seems a little bit high, right? They're interested in the house, but they're a little bit standoffish about the price. Right? It makes sense to be able to sit down with them right there and show them, hey, here's the comparables. Here's what's sold recently in this area. Here's why you want to jump on this house right now. It's a great deal. Market reports for the neighborhood, right? If you had something like this printed out, right? It's just another good piece of material, piece of content, something that shows this person that you're not just an agent sitting there hoping they'll buy the house that you walked into, right? You're somebody that knows the market, you know the area, you know what's going on here, right? These are great things to have if the people checking out the open house are some of those people from earlier, right, that were one of the 3 to 7 houses in the area that might end up going on the market in the next 90 days, right? This is the kind of information you want to have for them. And then Kathleen in her post and George in his, right, they talk about that something from the lender. And a lot of folks talked about having, like, even their flyers will be done where on the front is the flyer for the house, on the back is the breakdown of the loan scenarios, right? It's an awesome thing to have with you. It's even better to have the lender there so he can explain these loan scenarios and really be able to sit down and talk to somebody about it. I wonder, how many of you guys, check in for me real quick, how many of you guys absolutely have your lender there with you? Check in for me. Never, almost always, never. I guess I just wonder, and maybe this is more of a rhetorical question, why? Like, why do you not have that extra support there? Is it because they won't go? There it is. D, you need a better lender. Somebody who's in D's area, she wrote, lender won't go. Does he have like an assistant or somebody that's trying to get their feet wet in the office who might be willing to get out and meet some folks and take an application? It's interesting to me that, okay, so some of you guys, a couple of folks say, hey, I'm an agent and a lender. So good, you're able to answer those questions. Bill says, I go to open houses with my agents every weekend. Awesome. All right, so when we talked a little bit about this, right, there was just a lot of mention of this, and I think it makes sense, right? You set the scene, and this really goes back to, are the homeowners on board? Right, is the house in tip-top shape? But you want to make sure, there's a few things when you get there the day of that you can do. Right, I had one lady who said, you know, she'd go an hour before, and there's just a little checklist of things that she it might have been in Kathleen's post here, but she, you know, it's lemon in the garbage disposal. It's a little bit of Febreze on the fabrics. It's, you know, if she went the day before, I think she used lavender in her vacuum cleaner to make the carpet smell good. They're just the things, right? When you get there the day of, like you open all the blinds and the windows and you get a bright, airy feeling. Maybe you have the front door open. Somebody had put that as a suggestion to make it feel inviting, like people just have to walk in. Like, well, it's kind of weird, right? If you come to an open house and like the front door is closed, right, and you kind of knock and you're not sure, like I thought this thing was open, right? That makes sense. Have the front door open. All right, so we want to get their information at some point, and it was funny to me because there was a few people that said, you know, I don't do this, right? I don't want to feel pushy. I don't want people to think I'm there just to collect names and email addresses. Look, that's part of why you're there, right? If we can all agree that, like, not every open house sells the house, well, then if we're still going to do them, we have to have a reason for that, and the reason would be we've got people, you know, prospects for our business potentially coming through our house, right? And there was a really good post, and it might have been Richard and Beth here, who talked about, look, I realize that not every person that walks through is like a prospect to buy this house, right? But every person that comes through is generally a prospect of some nature. And that could be that they're a prospect looking to maybe potentially sell in the future in this neighborhood, right? They're a prospect looking to buy in the future, but not this house, right? They're just a looky-loo neighbor, but they're still, that person's still a prospect, right? They're a looky-loo because they want to know how much their neighbor's house is going to sell for. So the idea of getting their information, right, it can be done in a variety of ways. I think Richard and Beth use this way, the guess the selling price sheet. So they've got something where they do a $100 gift card, right, for the person who guesses what the house ends up selling for. And people can put their little guesses down. Of course, they give their name and their contact information. A home survey is another one. And a lot of people use this as kind of an approach after the person has come in and they've gone through the house, right? And on the way out, they'll say, hey, would you mind taking 2 minutes? Excuse me. Would you mind taking 2 minutes to fill out this survey for the sellers so they know what things, they need to be thinking about in terms of getting this house sold? Is there anything, that you could share with us? Right? Maybe it's an offer for listings in the area, right? There's got to be something, right? It could just be a sheet. No matter what you do, you have to be prepared to give the spiel on why somebody should fill this out, right? So if it's just a sheet, the spiel might be, hey, we like to keep log of everybody that comes in. The sellers like to know who visited today, and we'd appreciate it if you'd fill this out, right? It might be, hey, if this wasn't the property for you, we'd love to have you fill this sheet out. We could send you any more listings that hit the market, in this area. There's got to be some reason for them to fill it out. And if there's no reason, you need to set kind of an expectation of why you hope they will do it. Now, a lot of you guys, I think, still use the sheet. And I called around to, I talked to 3 agents who are mega agents. These are all guys doing, their teams do more than 300 transactions a year. And all 3 of them still use the sheet. And I was a little bit shocked by that. And I asked one of them, I said, why don't you use an iPad? And he said, I haven't gotten to the point where I'm going to buy an iPad for all 15 members of my team. And I said, well, you can have a couple. And he said, yeah, the sheet works. One idea that's kind of that Gene uses that's not the sheet is he'll use a card. So instead of having like this one sheet where everybody might, if there's 4 people there at the same time, they would have to like stand in line or wait around, right? If you had an iPad, like only one person at a time can do that. He'll have little cards that he'll just hand out with a little pencil, and that way, while they're going around the house, they can fill out the answers to the questions that are on the card. All right, there's a couple of things after the open house, right? These aren't groundbreaking, but right, people expect you to follow up, right? If somebody gives you their contact information, especially if they give it to you for a reason, right, it's a good idea to follow up, and it's probably the best idea to follow up the sooner the better. But one of the reasons why you might consider using something like openhomepro.com, and there's a bunch of other of these kind of apps out there, not a bunch, there's a few others anyway, is with something like openhomepro.com, when they fill it out on your iPad, you automatically kind of have their information, right? You can import it into your CRM, right? The Open Home Pro does like an automated email that thanks them for having attended the open house, like as they're walking out the door, right? So that kind of thing could make that follow-up a little bit easier, right? At least allows you to like get an email out to everybody that stopped by the open house, right? And with Open Home Pro, the email includes like a link back to the flyer for the property, right? But you want to do some kind of follow-up. And again, especially if you told the people, like, I'm going to do something, right? If it's, you have the listing alert thing and asking them if they want to get, alerts of listings that are in the neighborhood, like, it makes sense that in the next 24 hours you would have done that first, right? Set the listing alert up, but then also let them know. And gosh, if it's a listing alert, like, I'm taking the opportunity to make that a phone call with somebody, right? And then you have to have some way to track your results. And this can be a little bit tricky, I think, especially if you're not getting like names and phone numbers for people. But Laura in her post, and she's addicted to open house, and Laura's the third post that I would really hope, you should read all of these, okay? But in Laura's post, she talks about how she's really been able to track her open houses down to the point where she knows now, after years of doing these, that it takes about 75 people through an open house for her to get some kind of piece of business out of that, whether it be a buyer or a potential seller, right? So what she's done is she's really been able to focus her open house and her business around this idea of, I just need to drive more people into my open houses because I realize that every 75th person that comes through the door turns into a deal. And I would guess for many of us, many of you, you have no sense for what this is. You just don't know, right? I mean, you know that last week's open house got you a buyer, right? But you don't necessarily know over the course of your open house history, like how many people have really come from that, how many people actually came through the house and are able to look at it like Laura does and say, look, I just know, right? It's a formula. If I get 75 people through these open houses, one of these people is going to turn into a client. You can read her post to get a little bit more insight on kind of how she does that. All right, we're at the end of the hour. I appreciate you guys joining me for ActiveRain University. My name is Bob Stewart. Behind the scenes, we got Carrie and Michelle. And on their behalf, you guys have a fantastic rest of your week, a great weekend. Bye-bye, everybody.